Republican presidential candidate Tim Scott facing some of his harshest liberal media critics head on. The South Carolina senator joined the Women of The View moments ago to make his case for the White House, and Scott's appearance comes after a series of racially charged attacks from many.
In a few minutes, what started as a typical interview spiraled into a heated confrontation that left everyone stunned. Tim Scott didn't just respond. He dismantled Hostin's claims with facts and a powerful personal story. What happens when political correctness meets raw truth?
Answer the question this way. One of the things I think about, and one of the reasons why I'm on the show, is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule.
Sunny Hostin, as usual, was ready to dive into the topic of systemic racism. She started by trying to find common ground with Tim Scott. She mentioned her own tough upbringing, growing up in the Bronx with both parents, surrounded by poverty and violence. She wanted to show that she understood hardship, just like Tim, who was raised by a single mother in a low-income household.
Answer the question this way. One of the things I think about, and one of the reasons why I'm on the show, is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule.
But then, Sunny shifted gears. She looked at Tim and said, "You are the exception." By calling him an exception, she was trying to make a point about systemic racism, suggesting that his success was not the norm for African Americans. Sunny's argument was that despite his achievements, the majority of African Americans still face significant barriers due to systemic racism. She implied that while Tim had managed to climb the ladder, most others couldn't because of these entrenched obstacles. Tim Scott wasn't having it. He responded calmly but firmly, highlighting other successful African Americans to counter Sunny's argument. He mentioned that the U.S. had seen an African American president and vice president, 2 African American secretaries of state, and various other prominent figures.
We've had an African American president, African American vice president. We've had 2 African Americans to be secretaries of the state.
Kaylee, just one of his many incredible.
This was just the beginning, but you could already see where this was heading. Tim Scott was determined to debunk the idea that African Americans could only succeed as exceptions. He wanted to highlight the progress made and the opportunities available to everyone, regardless of race. Sunny, on the other hand, was set on emphasizing the systemic issues that she believed still held many back.
40% homelessness,
and 50%
of African Americans,
50% of the folks in our community
get 13% of the population.
You had a chance to ask the question. I know I've watched you on the show that you like people to be deferential and respectful, so I'm going to do the same thing.
True.
After Tim Scott highlighted successful African Americans, Sunny Hostin decided to dive deep into her claims about systemic racism. She wasn't just going to let his examples slide without making her point crystal clear. Sunny laid out her argument by touching on 5 major areas where she believes systemic racism is deeply embedded: economics, education, healthcare, criminal justice, and housing. She pointed out the wage gaps and employment disparities that persist between Black and white Americans. She mentioned that African Americans are often paid less for the same work and have higher unemployment rates. This economic inequality, according to her, is a clear sign of systemic racism. She argued that this disparity in educational opportunities sets African American children back from an early age, making it harder for them to break out of the cycle of poverty. When it came to healthcare, Sunny didn't hold back. She highlighted the stark differences in health outcomes between African Americans and whites. She talked about higher rates of chronic illnesses, poorer access to quality healthcare, and the alarming maternal mortality rates among Black women. According to Sunny, these health disparities are a direct result of systemic racism in the healthcare system.
Dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today that the only way to succeed is by being the exception. I will tell you that if my life is the exception, I can't imagine.
But it is.
But it's not, actually. It's
been 114 years.
Yeah, so.
Moving on to criminal justice, Sunny pointed out the disproportionate rates at which African Americans are arrested, convicted, and incarcerated. She argued that the criminal justice system is rigged against Black people, citing examples of police brutality and the higher likelihood of harsher sentences for African Americans compared to whites for similar crimes. Finally, Sunny addressed housing. She brought up the long history of redlining and discriminatory lending practices that have kept African Americans from owning homes and building generational wealth. Throughout her claims, Sunny emphasized how these systemic inequalities impact African Americans on a daily basis. She painted a picture of a society where racial inequality is deeply ingrained in every aspect of life, from the money you earn to the education you receive, the health care available to you, the justice you encounter, and the home you live in.